So, what is going on with H-1B visas? It's kind of blown up all through Twitter and other social media. Vivek chose between Christmas and New Year's to kind of pick a fight on the H-1B visa process. And what his point was is that there's a work ethic problem between the US and India, and that India's work ethic is much better for whatever reason, and that we've got a cultural issue in the United States. That created a lot of backlash. And then Elon, and I think I can call him Vivek and Elon, and everybody knows who I'm talking about, kind of like Madonna and Shakira. So Elon doubled down. He said exactly the same thing and said we should open up. We've got a gap in our STEM resources in the US that we can't fill, and we should multiply the number of H-1B visas that we bring in. And that just created a big problem. I had wanted to post about this because there's so much conversation going on. I think a little bit of misinformation too about exactly what H-1Bs are. Misinformation coming from Vivek and Elon as well as other people. But I had a little bit of a cold. I couldn't speak because I was coughing. So if I cough throughout this, please bear with me. But I've had over 30 years experience. I've been dealing with H-1B as an IT director since H-1B was created in 1990. So I want to go through what are the facts at a high level. I'm not going to get too pedantic on this, but I do want to talk about the facts just so that we're all talking about the same thing and we understand what H-1B is. Then I'll talk about my experiences, anecdotal, not scientific sampling, but factual. And then I'll give you my opinions. So that's the part you may want to shut off if you don't want to hear me rambling about my opinions, but they're based on my experience and the facts. So, what's an H-1B? It was created into law in 1990, and they're to bring on resources external to the country that are within specialty fields. So I'll talk a lot about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, specifically IT because that's my background. But within STEM, it's certainly other fields, medical, engineering, and outside of STEM, as I show here, it's journalism and accounting and law, and even education. Probably more so at the college level, but I think across the board. I'm not going to delve into that. And what are the requirements for H-1B? So if I'm an H-1B resource from another country, I want to come, I want to work in the United States, what do I need? You need a bachelor's level degree minimum because it's to bring on someone from a specialty field or equivalent. So you need to show that I've got that experience. And you need to be sponsored by an employer. That's it. There's nothing else that you need to be able to submit and get an approved application. So an employer does need to sponsor you, and you need to have that bachelor level degree uh, ability. So what's the stay duration? 6 years. Once you apply, and so long as that you're employed and you're being sponsored, you could stay for 6 years. If you petition for an extension, you could stay then as well. In many cases, you can continue to work. Um, it is a path to the green card application. Certainly, while people are here for 6 years, they apply for the green card, and because they're here working, it's a lot easier for them to get it. The green card is a work visa that allows you to work and not need sponsorship, and it's a permanent work card visa. And with that, it's a definite pathway to citizenship. And again, if you have that green card, or even if you have the H-1B, you can apply for citizenship. And being in the U.S., it's going to make it a lot easier to become a citizen. So, how many H-1B visa people do we have? Well, by law, there's a quota: 65,000 annual, plus an additional 20,000 annual for those with master's level degrees or that kind of experience. Um, there are provisions that they make every year that expand that. So it's kind of an 85,000 people base, and then as people justify it, it goes up. It's been 180,000. I think it's actually gone over 200,000 some years, so it increases. And how many people do we have in the U.S. now? The Department of Homeland estimates 750,000 H-1B visas. That math kind of makes sense based on 85,000 a year for 6 years. And then with some flex and people extending. Where do they come from? Where do these H-1B resources come from? As this chart shows, and this is a pretty good one, 75% of them come from India. And then if you look at the next one down, it's China. And then if you also look down at the bottom there, I think it's 8, it's Brazil. And it's just kind of interesting that that's BRICS, right? Um, Brazil, Russia, India, China. But 75% is from India. Certainly not a normal distribution, but 75% India. So I'm going to speak a lot about India for good reason. Most H-1Bs come from India, and it's not close. So who employs H-1B resources? Um, uh, there's a lot of different companies. This is a list of the top 20. Amazon being a very big employer. Now they would employ the Amazons of the world, the Googles of the world, Disney would employ the H-1B directly, meaning they would sponsor them. They would hold the paper on these work visas for the people. There would be individuals that they would be holding that paper for, pay whatever fees, sponsor them. The H-1B resource, the person working for the company, if Amazon lets them go, they've got to leave the country or file for an exception until they can get another uh, employer to sponsor them. There's normally a window that they have to do that. Now, the other kind of company, Cognizant, Ernst& Young, Infosys, HCL, Tata, they're consulting companies. They hold the paper. They sponsor the H-1B. And this is really where the floodgates open up. They sponsor the resources, but they really don't employ them in a way other than consulting. So they'll work at other companies. So I've worked in fintech and I've worked in manufacturing. Fintech are companies like TIA, Bank of America, Wachovia, JP Morgan. They will use the consulting companies and utilize the H-1B resources so that they don't have to hold the paper and sponsor the H-1B resources. There's pluses and minuses to that, but these are the types of employers that will hire H-1B. The big question is, and what Vivek and Elon and other supporters of H-1B claim, is that there's a STEM gap: science, technology, engineering, mathematics, resource capability, that we don't have enough employees within the country, so that we need to go outside the country to bring them in. Understand, we're talking about H-1B here only. This is what we're talking about. H-1B is bachelor's level experience, maybe master's, mid-level, not your one percenters. These aren't people splitting the atom. This is me. It's by percentage, it's probably you, but you may be a one percenter listening to this. So that's the level that we're talking about. More than half of the people with degrees in STEM, some sort of STEM, engineering, computer science degree, are not employed within STEM. So there's no way that we have a STEM gap that H-1B is filling. I'll just leave this up for a second. So that's the basis of what we're talking about here. There is no gap. There is no reason to reach outside the country because we have people with degrees, with experience that we could draw upon, and we're not, because we're giving those jobs to H-1B. And this is under fact, because it is. So now I'm going to switch to my experience. What's the quality of the H-1B worker? They're bachelor's and master's degree level, and they're mid-level. They're, as I said, they're not the one percenters. So keep that in perspective. They are often freshers. Freshers in India, and 75%, so I'm going to refer to India, are people just out of school that just have that bachelor's degree and they're just out of school. So maybe they have a year experience, but there's still a lot of training they need because there's, especially within IT, there's a lot you need to know, and it's on the job training that's gonna get you that experience and knowledge. So that's where they're at. There's some very good people with H-1B, and yeah, as I said, they're all mid-level. They're not the top 1%. Matter of fact, if there is a top 1% person who can really design something that's new, somebody that I can understand, Elon Musk at Tesla, I can understand Amazon needing a top 1%er to really design something new on a system or on a car or something to do with batteries engineering. These are not those people that are going to do that for you. I'm not going to do that for you. If they happen to have an H-1B and they're doing it, it's an anomaly. It's not designed for that. And repeatedly, the the advocates of H-1B will refer to the top 1%. Matter of fact, it's less than 1% that they refer to. It's apples and oranges. That's not what this program's about. It's not who they're bringing in. And that's just a fact. They are good people, though. I've worked with maybe 1,000 H-1B resources over my career, maybe more, and they're good. Are they better or worse than Americans? Yes, it's there's differences for sure, but they're good, and Americans are good as well. So I wouldn't say that India resources are much better than American resources by any means, but they're good people, and I enjoy working with them. I have many friends who were or are H-1B, and I plan to keep it that way. There are frustrations with the U.S. That some of the H-1B resources have. Now, I'm going to use an example. I'd say it's more offshore, which is not what I'm talking about, but it is within the H-1B community as well. India is based on the UK education system. So the way they speak, the way they write, their grammar is English, not American. There are differences. I've worked in the UK and there are differences and you have to learn them. Now, put the fact that they're in India and there's Indian dialects, there's India accents and pronunciations on top of it, and it's culturally relevant to them. It's who they are. So there's a frustration that they need to speak and write and work American. And I understand it. And it's a sense of pride. And some adapt and some don't. It just is what it is. And there's definitely a frustration with the contractors. Contractors aren't always honest with the H-1B. That's one. So they might tell them a job is temp to perm, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And also, when you have an H-1B, you're tied to that employer. So if it's a Disney, they could let you go, and unless if you can find another job that's going to sponsor you, you're going back to your country. Also, if you're working for a Cognizant, and I'll pick on Cognizant because they're in that number two slot, if they want you to work in Florida one year, the next year Chicago, then the next year LA, you have to do it or you don't have your sponsorship anymore. And if you think about it, if you're here for 6 years and maybe more, you probably want to buy a house and you have a family and you want to settle down and get some roots in the US. It's tough. It can be tough to do, and it is frustrating. They are people. We are all people, right? So, from a hiring perspective, as a hiring manager, you often don't have choice. Either an executive laid down the law because they presented something to the board and they're either going to save money or whatever spin they put on it that the H-1B is going to solve. You don't have a choice. You're hiring the H-1B, or HR has done that. So you can. I've been given a resume of a U.S. citizen and I couldn't use it, even though that they were willing to work for less money than the H-1B and they had the exact experience I was looking for. I knew they could do the job. It's just there's no choice there. There is some dishonesty in the interview process. If you interview enough H-1B candidates, you'll uncover. I've had a different person show up to work than who I interviewed. I've never had that happen with a U.S. citizen. Also, because H-1B often will come from a consulting company that are embedded within the company that you're working for, they'll be heavily coached. So if you're interviewing an individual that's an American citizen, there's a good chance he or she is not going to be heavily coached. And that's important because you're trying to figure out what's their skill set, what's their ability, what's their pluses and minuses. And if they're heavily coached, you're not going to get that. Consulting companies will often block Americans from the position. So if I'm a graduate, new graduate, and I'm applying for a position that is open for U.S. citizens as well as people from a consulting company, the consulting company is a company like Cognizant, it's huge. They're going to have a big leg up on you, and there's a good chance they're going to deny you that position either from volume or they've negotiated a deal already with the hiring company, and often the hiring company will want to use the American filling out an application, showing up for multiple interviews, just as column fodder to show, look, we interviewed from both, but they'll go with the H-1B. It's just real world. There's a lack of diversity. 75% are from India. I was having a problem with communication. My H-1B team needed to work with the business, and I was having a consistent problem across the board where there was miscommunications with the business side, and they needed to understand requirements, they needed to understand problems, and I was just having a problem every single day from not one person but from the team. So I was asked to go out to dinner with my Cognizant rep, and I took it as an opportunity to speak to him about it. And he didn't really come back to me with the solution. He said he'd work on it. So at the end of dinner, I asked him about, well, what about diversity? And that's all I said. What I meant was, I'm only seeing people from India from Cognizant. Is that, what I was asking was, can I get some diversity? I don't care. U.S. citizens, Finnish, UK, wherever, Canadian. That's what I was asking. Somebody with a different background. The answer I got back was very telling. Now, number one, he was from India. He was born in India. I'm not sure what his status was, visa or citizenship wise, but he came back to me and said, we hire women as well, Indian women. So there's a lack of diversity, and it's real. Um, as I said before, the consulting companies will sometimes lie to the H-1B resource. They'll promise them a temp to perm position, meaning it's a consulting position, but they're going to hire you. And most of the time, the reason why you're dealing with a Cognizant, and I'm picking on them because they're number two on the list, but I've found it true across all the firms that use H-1B resources. Um, and it's not true. And then the hiring manager has the problem because you may have a very good resource, but they've got an attitude problem now because they were promised by the consulting company that they'd have a perm position that you don't have the ability to give them. And the consultants are stuck with the sponsorship. So they're stuck with Cognizant. That creates an attitude problem too. Not just Cognizant again, but they're stuck with that consulting company, and they may need to bounce around, and that does create some animosity, without a doubt. And it does limit competitive recruiting. It's not capitalism. It's not diversity. It's you're getting forced into hiring one set of people, and I think most problems can be solved, or a lot of problems can be solved with diversity. You bring in people with different backgrounds, different experiences, different skill sets, and that makes up a team. Where if you've got one basic skill set and background, you're going to have a consistent problem, and I've experienced that for sure. So, one thing I've seen, especially on Twitter, is who's smarter, Americans or Indians? And I don't know. I mean, my personal experience is it just doesn't matter. But everything I looked at, and IQ number one is a questionable way to measure anything. My guess is that they measure IQ differently in India in some way. The testing's probably different based on experience, but I've never seen Americans show up lower. And so I think Americans, they're in here, they're in the top 20. They typically show up around there. India, not so much so. But India is 1.3 billion, and America's over 300 million. So the law of averages you're playing with there too. My point here, the only reason why I'm putting this up is Americans aren't dumb. They're not lazy either, educationally speaking. Now, this is important because you hear a lot about the top elite Indian schools, and they're good. They have good ones. They have ones that they would claim are better than the elite technical schools in the U.S. I think it's a toss of a coin. I think the elite schools in the U.S. and the elite schools in India are probably fairly comparable. I think they're a little bit different, but they're comparable for sure. Now, on average, U.S. nails it, and they do it worldwide. And that's not a question. Anyone who's saying to you that computer science, that we're lagging behind from an education standpoint, and I think we need to improve our computer science and STEM education without a doubt, but anyone who says that we're lagging behind on average is doesn't know the facts and is lying to you. So some more of my opinion here. um, about the H-1B. There is no STEM gap. There's no gap of resources that H-1B is ever going to fill. They're going to displace U.S. workers, period. And that's it. And we see that. There's no skill gap. Doesn't exist for H-1B. I'm not saying that we don't need more Einsteins. We don't need more H-1Bs. It's not diverse. It favors India. It's mathematically proven. It restricts the hiring managers, saying you're not going to hire the best resources. H-1B does not let you hire the best resources. I can't say that enough. It H-1B also replaces American workers, and not necessarily ones that are making a ton more money. H-1B, they want H-1B workers to make a good salary because they don't want it to replace American workers at the same level. However, it does. And Tesla just did it, and they brought them in at a good salary, but they can control the workers a lot better if they are from from another country coming in through H-1B. So you're not saving money. You're not getting a better resource technically. But Tesla has let go hundreds of American workers and replaced them with H-1B. IBM has more workers in India than they do the United States. And Disney famously laid off a lot of technical workers, replaced them with H-1B and offshore, and had those U.S. workers train their replacements. And they were pretty humiliated to do that. The whole interview process, it is tough to interview nowadays, and it's because you're competing with these consulting companies, and it skews the hiring process. It skews the hiring results, which is not a good thing. There's and there are abuses of the H-1B process. They lie, as I said before, to the candidates. The candidates, the H-1B candidates, do get stuck with who's ever sponsoring them, and they're kind of locked in. You hear indentured servant a lot, and it's tough to argue with that expression. There is a high likelihood for corruption within these corporations using H-1B. Now, I'm not going to give you any evidence. I'm not going to make the claim, but I will say I worked for a VP that used to say all the time, where there's smoke, there's fire. There's a lot of smoke around H-1B and the contracts, and I would be very surprised if there isn't corruption going on there, whether it's kickbacks or something else. H-1B is a issue for companies because H-1B visa workers are not citizens. and they're not tied to the company forever. They're typically going to work a project. It could be a couple of years, but then move on. So if you're working for a Bank of America as an H-1B worker, you're then going to move on, and maybe you're going to work for Wachovia. So you're going to take all that experience, knowledge, maybe secrets, and then apply it to the other companies. So you've got a security issue there. Same could be said for citizens, but there's less control because it's an H-1B. National security. I alluded to this before. The BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and some other countries, they've claimed, they've made the statement, their goal is to replace the U.S. dollar as the fiat currency. So their stated goal is counterproductive to the U.S. It's not about making America strong. And the top two H-1B countries are India and China. Something to think about. And these people who are moving into the government, like Vivek and Elon, talking about making America strong, and then giving the jobs to BRIC countries, it's very counterintuitive and counterproductive. So right around the holidays, you take a look at who is posting. And I'm not going to read this, but this is a pretty popular guy out there on Twitter. And the stuff he was posting, very racist, very biased, and very untrue. So that's just a result of H-1B. Also, Elon, big proponent of H-1B, going to head up, targeted to head up a government agency. And this is the kind of post he's coming out with. Not a dialogue, not a justification. He didn't do, like I laid out for you, the opportunities. Is there a gap? Where they're coming from? None of that. Just basically saying in a very vulgar way, I want it. Not something I would support ever. So there's no evidence of a resource gap. There's no evidence of a skill set gap for H-1B, bachelor's and master's degree level. It restricts competition in the marketplace, without a doubt. It's not capitalism. It it definitely limits immigration from other countries. It's not diverse. It's coming 75% from India. That's not a normal distribution. And by limiting the college grads that can get jobs within STEM, it's going to limit where students go in the future. So if we start to reduce the number of U.S. STEM students, that's going to impact our workforce and our country in the future. And I think that's pretty serious. That alone is enough to abolish the H-1B. I would rather have a resource gap than this. It definitely promotes corruption and discrimination within the corporate environment. I've witnessed it. I alluded to where there's smoke, there's fire, that there could be kickbacks and things like that at the executive level. At the hiring level, there's definite discrimination. And if you think about the progression, someone comes in and it's been in place since 1990. Someone comes in as H-1B, they get their green card, then they become a citizen. By and large, I've never met someone who's become a U.S. citizen from India who's ever given up their Indian citizenship. And you don't have to, so why would you? But they don't. Nikola Tesla did. When he became a U.S. citizen, he gave up his Austrian citizenship. Elon Musk has not. But so that's the progression. They do that. Well, who are they bringing in next? They're going to bring in their friends. That may sound very anecdotal, but it's real. So it's very biased, and that is corrupt. It heavily favors BRICS, which is not going to make America strong. We need to support ourselves, and if there's no need for it, why would we be giving American jobs to countries that have stated the goal of replacing the U.S. dollar? And as I showed, and I didn't spend too much time on it, but Vivek's post regarding India work ethic did a couple of things. One is it opened the conversation to becoming very racist against the United States and and Americans. That's one. That's unacceptable. Racism and discrimination is unacceptable across the board, but in this case, it's for our own jobs. The other thing that was interesting, he posted it and he had his interview right around the time that 85% of my H-1B team was visiting, was taking off PTO and going back home to visit India to visit their families. Now they're humans. The reason why 85% I let 85% of them go is because they're humans and they need to go back and see their families, and I think that's the right thing to do. But in terms of work ethic, the people who are working the holidays 7 days a week on call, 24 hours a day, they were U.S. citizens by and large. So the whole work ethic argument, the ability argument, the need is out the window. I hope that cleared some things up. Feel free to leave a comment if you'd like, and I appreciate you dealing with my raspy voice throughout.